so we can put this up on the internet for other folks who want to see it. So Denise, take it away.
Thank you, Delana. Thank you for putting this together, and thanks for everyone who's out there joining us in this virtual webinar. Just like Delana said, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of what we've been doing. And frankly, we started this probably day one of working at home. In fact, I think it was on a Saturday that a lot of this work actually started. And frankly, the movement began maybe a day or two before we got involved, when the Office of the State Public Defender sent a letter to the governor hoping to receive his attention on what needed to be done in our jails, in our courtrooms, simply because there would be a mass congregation of individuals, whether they're for jury trials or going into the jails for obviously lots and lots of reasons. That letter did not get a whole lot of traction, and so we decided that it was best to broaden that coalition. And so with the State Public Defender's Office, the Colorado Criminal Defense Bar, the Denver Municipal Public Defender, CCJRC, which is the Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition, and the Colorado Freedom Fund, and others, we addressed a letter to the governor, to the state directors of public safety and corrections, and also addressed the Chief Justice of our courts. And what we were encouraging each of them to do was to use whatever power they could, which we believe to be a good amount of power, and I apologize for my dog barking there in the back, to decarcerate our jails, prisons, detention centers, and other group care facilities like halfway houses, for example. So on March 25th, following our letter, the governor did issue some guidance. And his guidance addressed jails and other detention facilities. The guidance was good in that it brought attention to the need to depopulate. The guidance emphasizes, for example, focusing on summons or citations over arrests. It also provided that if arrests were necessary, that there be a priority, that serious offenses or violent offenses would be on the top of the list versus non-violent or non-serious offenses. And also encouraging the use of pretrial diversion as a means to decrease the number of individuals in our jails. So echoing the governor's guidance, which came out on March 25th, we followed, I think, pretty much a day later with a letter to our sheriffs, all of them across the state. And we were encouraging each of them to focus on the public health risk that is present in our jails. Frankly, we have been saying this all along, and we continue to echo it as many times as we can, that the question is not if the virus will take a hold in our jails, but rather when. And we're actually finding out that the when is now. We know of one individual for sure, an inmate at the Denver jail, the downtown Denver jail, who is in quarantine and has tested positive for the virus. Denver has a unique relationship with Denver Health, and so we're hopeful that that individual is getting proper medical care, although we don't know what the possibilities or chances are of the virus spreading beyond that one individual. We also know of as many as, I think, 5 cases involving public defenders, many reported cases of staff that are either in quarantine or have tested positive. Jails, simply put, are not conducive to the 6 feet highly recommended distancing that the CDC is recommending. Individuals in the jails often also congregate in groups of 10 or more. Inmates sleep within feet of each other, sometimes 3 individuals to a cell. They share the same toilet. And I always need to emphasize, and I hope that everybody realizes, the part of the concern here is at the end of the day, we know that over half, and in some jails, close to 60% of the individuals in that jail are innocent. They have never been convicted of a crime, and they are there pre-trial simply because they couldn't pay the ransom to get out. And we also know that on an everyday basis, approximately 600 individuals leave the jail on a daily basis. And so people walking out of our jails daily can present a risk that the virus will be transmitted to the community at large. And so therefore something must be done. Now, it might be the case that individuals, by and large, I'm not suggesting that of this particular audience, but folks may not care about the health and well-being of the inmates, but we should all care about the health and well-being of the individuals that work there: sheriffs, maintenance workers, people that go there to offer interpretation services, to probation officers, parole officers. And really, Colorado is for everyone, and that does in fact include the health and well-being of the inmates that are in those jails. I'm going to turn it over now to Rebecca Wallace. She could talk about a lot of the specifics, and then we also have Elizabeth Epps on our panel, who is the founder of the Colorado Freedom Fund. She's also a pretrial justice organizer at the ACLU, but she will have some really painful stories, frankly, of individuals that she has talked to, because she really works to get people to pay their ransom, or she pays the Colorado Freedom Fund pays the ransom to get these folks out. If there's time remaining, we can talk a little bit more about what is happening on the prisons front in particular, as well as our Division of Youth Services, which has a number of detained youth that also present some of the same risks. And then we could talk a little bit about the Aurora Immigration Detention Facility. But on that note, I will turn it over to Rebecca for a little bit more of an in-depth analysis or discussion of what's going on in the jails. Rebecca?
Thanks, Denise. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Wallace from the ACLU. I'm a staff attorney and policy counsel here. And, we've been doing our best to step in and really focus a lot of attention on what's happening in the jails. As Denise mentioned, we know that in most jails, people are sleeping 2 to 4 people a cell. And that for many of the work release programs where people are out in the community all day, they're coming back and basically sleeping in bunkhouses after being in the community all day. And we have been really careful and mean it to focus on the public health reasons that we need to see decarceration right now. But we are not, it is not lost on us that the whole reason we're in this place to begin with is because of mass incarceration. So our jails are full because of mass incarceration. And right now, this is the newest sort of horror that is an effect of mass incarceration. So what we have focused on is taking the public health guidance and figuring out A, what the Constitution requires, and B, what it would mean to follow the public health guidance. And in this case, we think that those are intimately interlinked, because when you have public health authorities saying everybody in the public needs to stay 6 feet away from one another unless they're in a household together, and they're doing that in order to protect people from very serious illness and death, and then we don't apply that to our prisons and jails, right? We call that essentially, like, those are unconstitutional conditions of confinement. And we have reached out to all of the sheriffs in the entire state, and we have told them that the Constitution and public health guidance requires them to depopulate to the point that they get down to essentially single cell, where both people who are behind bars, both living and working there, can practice the CDC guidelines. And, the reality is that we have been talking about for decades, and so have, many of our community partners who've been leading this decarceration work, that there are way too many people in our jails, that it is not making us safer, and that we actually can depopulate and see that our entire community is safer. And what we have seen is, since the crisis began, and this is sort of the good news, we have seen about a 30% depopulation of our jails in Colorado. I know that feels remarkable and good from our perspective, but it also is pretty disturbing that it takes a public health crisis to do this. And what we've asked for jails to do, and pressed with the support of the indigent defense community and other community collaborators, has been to focus on only keeping people in jail who pose an immediate risk of violence or harm to others. Let's just think about that for a moment. I mean, how could jails ever be used for anything else? And yet that is all we want to do, is get sheriffs and prosecutors and judges to agree that if they're going to keep people in jail at a time where putting them in jail poses serious risk of harm, especially to the many high-risk individuals inside those jails, and also to the correctional staff, and also to the community to whom the correctional staff return to and many inmates are released to, that we want them to just focus on that small group of people that actually might pose a real risk of harm to the public. We have seen some jails to take the effort to decarcerate as much as 65%. And this is not divided by political, like a political view. We've had jails that have been on the other side of many fights with us do this decarceration work, because they know that it is the right thing to do for the public, for their constitutional obligations, and for the staff. We also are seeing many jails that are straggling behind. And I'll just tell you about one of them as an example. The Weld County Jail is of the top 10 most populous jails in the state, which covers about 80% of the entire jail population. The Weld County Jail has done the least decarceration. And if you spend some time looking at the Facebook page of the Weld County Sheriff, it's not going to surprise you that he's sort of denying the science here, saying that he has that his staff have the ability to handle viruses and that they're not going to be depopulating. And that's despite literally all of the public health guidance, all of it, saying that depopulation is necessary, and even having governor guidance and having about 70% of jails working towards decarceration. And there's a lot of reasons that that's disturbing, where we see a sheriff putting politics above public health and fundamentally at the end, public safety. But there's a lot of reasons to be disturbed. But in Weld County, one of the reasons we're disturbed is because it's a hot spot for COVID-19. It has the fifth most, of all the counties in the entire state of Colorado, it has the fifth highest concentration of COVID-19 infections, and it has the second highest number of deaths. So for that to be a community where the sheriff puts up blinders about the realities of the fact that he is the only congregate setting in the entire county that is doing nothing to abide by CDC guidelines, that's an area of focus for us. So I think that the community conversation is going the right direction in Colorado. We haven't seen enough movement in all of the jails, and there are some jails where we're really seeing recalcitrance, and we are thinking, who can we turn to right now to get leadership that is going to push those recalcitrant jails? Well, let me tell you what's happened in other states and what we would like to see here. We have seen chief justices from other states step up and give very clear guidance to all of the judges across the entire state that they need to review the jail rosters and release everybody who is not a safety risk. And we are not seeing that same guidance here from our Chief Justice. We have been in conversations with him in coalition. We have put as much pressure as we have been able to date, and we're thinking about what is the next stage of this campaign. And I think that, that there's a lot of focus here from that state judicial leadership that, well, individual judges know what's best in their jurisdiction. And this is one time where we think it's pretty clear that this is not a problem that knows any geographic boundaries, and that it really calls out more than any problem we have ever faced for a statewide solution to create prompt and consistent responses across the whole state. So we are really working to get all jails to that single cell status, and then to save for a little bit down the line a conversation where we look back and say, what did it look like to have less people in our jails? How did that work for our community? And that's something for us to all stay tuned for, how we can hold on to the reforms that are coming now, that are coming right now because of the public health crisis. But at the moment, we're staying focused on the public health crisis. I am really happy that we have Elizabeth Epps here to share with us some of her experiences. She has been in the trenches duking it out with in the jails to try to bring our neighbors home. And while I've been sitting safely behind my computer writing letters. So Elizabeth, please tell us more about what you've been learning.
Thank you for the handoff, and thanks to the dozens of you all who I see have joined us tonight. I'm Elizabeth Epps, and I'm a pretrial justice organizer with the ACLU of Colorado. As mentioned, I'm also the director of the Colorado Freedom Fund. I'm one of the two directors of the Colorado Freedom Fund, and I'm pretty sure my co-director, Eva Frickel, is also on the call tonight. She is, we're gonna talk about someone who's in the trenches. She's doing that as well. So in our couple minutes together, I'd like to do three things. I'd like to briefly amplify a couple of things that I think are particularly important that my colleagues said, share with you just a couple of stories of what we've seen and heard in the past week. And then for those of you who may not be talking to folks on the inside of these cages, thirdly, I'd like to just tell you some of what we're hearing. So I want to, at the risk of being redundant, our policy director, Denise May, said something about paying ransom and about the fact that half of the folks in these cages are innocent. There's a time for a continuing conversation that we need to have about should people be in cages, period. But it is really important that we understand who we are talking about in these cages, and that we are talking about people who are more often than not legally innocent, right? They haven't had their day in court. And what we mean by that is that quite literally, they're only still in the cage because of their poverty. They, most of them have a bond set, a cash bail, a money bond, and that's what we're talking about when we're talking about ransom. So these are people who the court, as Rebecca was saying, we need our Chief Justice and our judges to do more. But in these cases, we have folks who have a bond set. They've been given a bond and they can't afford it. So that's sort of the, I just think it's really important to highlight the extremity of these are people who, but for their lack of money, would be home and would be out. So that's one thing I want to amplify. Last week, so what we do at the Colorado Freedom Fund is we pay ransom. So we go and we post bond for our neighbors in Colorado who aren't able to do so. This crisis has amplified a lot of policy concerns that existed, and some of which I hadn't even really thought of. One is the issue of being able to pay bond online. There are some counties like Larimer that force us to pay bail online. And in some ways that have been frustrating to me, and I've really had to rethink that, because in terms of capacity, how many more people would we be able to get out if we could go online and pay these ransoms across the state? So we get referrals every day from public defenders, from other defense counsel, sometimes from family members, and from people in the cages themselves asking for help with their bonds. And on last Thursday, so a few days ago, I actually went to the Denver cage and spent $1,010 to buy freedom for 3 people. Every individual is unique, right? And yet at the same time, we keep seeing these certain commonalities. And one consistent commonality is, of course, their poverty. Their bonds were $500, $500, and $10. 10 is an individual, so one person's bond was $10. So without even almost getting into the alleged facts of this person's case, surely you know that they're not that dangerous if they're only $10 dangerous. I'm not quite sure what $10 dangerous means, but I hope through the screen you can feel me in saying that I think we should be able to agree that $10 dangerous is not that dangerous. The other 2 gentlemen with the $500 bonds, one of them is extremely vulnerable as he's a cancer patient undergoing treatment. $500, it's a hard amount for me because I think that a lot of us who've been, we use the phrase starving grad students or broke grad students, and where we've eaten ramen noodles, we probably could have gotten together $500 from friends or a credit card or family. And the difference between freedom and not for this person who's receiving cancer treatment was that $500. So as excited as I am to see numbers, jail counts down by half or by 30% or more, it really shows that we have a lot to do on the policy side as well as on the humanity side when there are still $500 bonds to pay. I wanted to end by mentioning a few of the things that I've now started taking calls again from inside the jails. When people can get through to us, we're very busy. We take collect calls. And overwhelmingly what we're hearing in both referrals and from family, and this isn't going to surprise you, but is people are scared. We who have the relative privilege of being outside the cages, right? We're scared, or I'll speak for myself. I'm scared. My roommate is in COVID, she actually just walked by to head on to her shift tonight that starts at 7. She's in COVID unit ICU nurse. I'm scared, right? And so we have so much access to information, and yet still we on the outside don't know what's going on. So I would ask folks to extend a bit of empathy. Imagine, right, we who have access to 24/7 news are folks on cages who cannot afford phone calls, who don't have TVs in all the units, much less social media. They have even less information, and it's terrifying. We're hearing people saying things like they're scared that they're scared to show that they're sick, because if they present, one, they don't think they can be tested. Two, if they are tested, they're scared that solitary confinement will be used as quarantine. I don't have any reason to think that's what happened, but these are the things that people are saying. And hopefully you can imagine their terror. And whether it's 10 or 500 or 5,000, these are folks who, but for their poverty, would be out. I think that in closing, I'll just say that this pandemic is forcing some hard conversations that are long overdue. And I really appreciate the push on that phrase of that we should, if at all, we should be using these cages only for folks who are immediately a threat to our safety, our physical safety. Because what we're doing by keeping them in there is endangering all of us. People get out, cases resolve, bonds are posted. And so everyone who's been in contact with this poor person in the Denver jail, right, is going to be someone who, I'll bite that thought and just say that I really want us to continue to focus on why people should be there in the first place. And it's an honor to be a part of this team. I think that I pass it back to Delana to see if she's going to lead if folks have questions. And I appreciate y'all's time, and I ask you to just remember that all the things that we're feeling on the outside, uncertainty, terror, confusion with handling information, that is folks on the inside who have even less access. Thank y'all for being with us tonight.
Denise, did you want to talk at all about what's going on in prisons really quick before we open up questions and answers? There is a box on your, for the participants where you can type in questions, and I can read them and the panelists can answer them, but I just wanted to, you wanted to touch on what's going on in prisons and maybe at the Aurora detention facility.
Yeah, thanks, Delana. Since we do have a little bit of time, I will do that, and this will not be as in-depth for some obvious reasons, but late last week, the governor did issue an executive order that was directed at the Department of Corrections, as well as the Department of Public Safety, because the Department of Public Safety is the primary entity that oversees our community corrections, which are the halfway houses. And then there was some direction that was set to the parole board. We don't know of any definitive plans that have come out of that executive order from either of those directors. But here are some of the things about the executive order that we think are pretty good and certainly of interest. One is, again, I should emphasize that the executive order, much like the guidance that we talked about earlier in the context of jails, is that it does emphasize the need to depopulate, and a recognition again that these sorts of facilities are really just a petri dish, if you will, of where the virus can take hold and really be damaging to a lot of individuals. So one of the things that the executive order does is it gives a great deal of discretion to the director of Department of Corrections, Dean Williams, to actually allow folks out on parole sooner than they would otherwise be allowed to go. Part of the problem with letting people out early on parole has always been, do they have a place to go? And so a lot of people are asking the question of why aren't there more people being released given where we are? But part of the problem is knowing if they have a place to go. And I think the other piece that we should be thinking about, which isn't obvious necessarily, is that if they have family, of course, that's probably easy, or friends or whatever, loved ones. But the fact of the matter is it's going to be a lot harder now to get jobs. If we thought that having a criminal record was hard, that's only going to get harder given the economics of what we're dealing with. So we haven't seen a definitive plan from the director about how he intends to use this discretionary parole, but we are waiting to hear. And like I said, the executive order came out late last week, so there hasn't been a whole lot of time to roll a lot of these things out. The other piece of the executive order has to do with community corrections. There seems to be a little bit more movement on the community correction side and letting folks be home detained as opposed to community corrections detained. So those are two good things. On the Aurora Immigration Detention Facility, as most folks may or may not know, the Aurora Detention Facility is privately owned by the GEO Corporation. And so there is a lot of question marks about what sort of authority the governor even has over this particular facility. So what we're looking at are some other ways to push the governor to act, which is for, number one, to lean on the ICE field office, to encourage that there be more releases on parole. And we do know, in fact, that over the last week or so, that there have been some releases out of that facility, primarily women, and they are being released on parole and, excuse me, not parole, I'm sorry, I misspoke, on PR bonds, personal recognizance bonds. The problem, of course, is you can never get definitive information because ICE doesn't give you info, even though on some level it is obligated to, but also because the facility is privately owned, makes it even far more difficult. But we have heard now of 2 individuals within that facility, workers that have contracted the virus. They have tested positive. And we also have heard reports, fairly reliable ones, that there may be up to 30 individuals who are on some level of quarantine. But again, what that looks like, we don't have any real sense. We have been in conversations with Representative Congressman Crow's office, as well as Congressman Negus's office, on a lot of the issues that they are working on, which is to get access and to get records and to get definitive answers on a lot of these pieces. So I don't want folks to lose sight of what's happening there. And finally, I'll add that there is, the Department of Youth Services, which also houses detained kids. And we have sent a letter to the governor there, hoping that he will encourage the it's the Division of Youth Services that reports to the Department of Human Services, that it also needs to move with some sense of urgency to get kids out of the detention facilities. So there's a lot of work being done on all of these issues. A lot of them are in the works. There's not definitive pieces yet about how many have been released and all of that, but we're certainly gathering all that information as much as we can so we can put it out there and also put pressure points on the individuals that we need to do. So with that, Delana, we can take questions. Unless, I don't know if Rebecca or Elizabeth, if you had anything else to add. Okay.
This is the quiet group. So if anyone has any questions, it seems like people have been putting questions into the chat box and we've been answering them. Elizabeth has answered a couple. Are there, if you want, you can raise your hand and I can take you off mute if you do want to ask a question on the
Can I share
okay.
someone? Oh, go ahead, Delana.
I do have a question here. Did you want to say something before I allow them to talk?
Nope.
Okay. All right. So this is MindSource is the name here.
Hi, Denise. This is actually Regina Maria. I have a question for all of the panelists. And my question is, I appreciate all of the perspectives of mass incarceration. I appreciate that we need to do something. We need to really utilize this scare to direct us in a better way on what we're already doing wrong. But what about DOC now, holding them accountable for people who are incarcerated, are not getting out, have life sentences and or long terms, and ensuring that they at least have humane conditions, and that Dean Williams is being held accountable and all of the wardens are being held accountable to actually protect inmates who are loved and who are cared for, and ensuring that we're not only protecting those inmates, but we're protecting and taking consideration about the corrections officers, because they're the only ones who are going in and out right now. We're not allowed to visit. And so I want to know how we're ensuring that they are actually testing our family members who are incarcerated, and how we're ensuring that they're ready for this festering of the virus in a really close proximity.
Ooh, okay. Hi, Regina. That's a big question. I think that one thing that we know by and large is that there is no testing inside the prison, and part of that is sort of a culmination of the whole problem with not having enough testing kits to begin with. I think all of us know that our country as a whole was way behind the ball on that front, and now trying to accumulate a lot of those tests and do something with it is a big issue. I completely agree with you that there has to be accountability. What we have been trying to do, we actually got some unfortunate information earlier today in the context of there being someone at Sterling who who's contracted the virus, that some of the wardens and some of the guards are not being particularly sensitive, shall we say, to the issue. And so we're working to get a meeting with Dean Williams to put some pressure on him. And when I say we, it's not just the ACLU, it's with a lot of our criminal justice reform partners, because what we're hearing is not positive. And so we do want to push that. And I think that's where the accountability is the public pressure to make these things obvious and public, so that they're not happening behind those fences and those walls, because that's usually the way it happens with jails and prisons. So I appreciate your concern. And if you have any specific or particular facts or stories that it would be helpful for us to know, you know how to find me, so let me know.
And one thing I just want to add to that is, while the governor gave Director Williams a good deal of discretion, that there are several of our community partners who work closely with Director Williams think that Director Williams may well use wisely, and I think that remains to be seen. It is true that Governor Polis did not take some of the bold of his own actions regarding clemency or his own movements that other governors in other states have taken. And, you know, we are, I think, you know, really trying to feel out where our partners who work really closely with the prisons, where they're feeling about the pressure points there versus, you know, waiting on Dean Williams to act versus putting more pressure on Governor Polis. But I just want to acknowledge that reality.
No, that's important.
So we do have a question about a call to action, you know, for folks that are on the webinar. Denise, did you want to talk about the call to action we did last week and the response that we had? Over 1,200 people took that call to action.
Yeah, I mean, really what we did is when we sent the letter to Governor Polis, which was on March 17th, we sent that letter. We had a call to action that said, hey, call the governor and let him know that we need him to act on doing something in the jails and prisons and other detention facilities and residential facilities. And so what was the number you said, Delana? How many individuals took action?
Before we shut it down, it was close to 1,200.
I mean, that's amazing. And part to the question of folks of putting public pressure, I really do believe that putting the letter out in a public way, the way we did with the governor, and having 1,200 people call did raise the alarm bell that they needed to do something. Because honestly, you know, the governor was coming out with these very, you know, bold executive orders on, you know, closing restaurants, you know, no congregations of, first it was less than 20 and then less than 10. And he was doing some bold stuff. And what we were worried about, quite frankly, was that there would be no action on the jails and prisons and detention facility side. And so that's why we felt the need to not only put out a very public letter going to the press, but also asking all of you to take part of be part of the solution. And you were, by doing 1,200 of these calls, which is awesome.
And we have some questions about clemency packages from people. So the question is, what about the clemency packages on Governor Polis's desk, and where is the clemency, are the two questions. So I don't know if you can speak to that at all.
I'll just speak very briefly and very broadly, and if Rebecca or Elizabeth have anything to add, please do. But you know, the governor gets clemency requests on a regular basis. The last one, of course, that he did were the 3 individuals on death row that he commuted their sentences. But he also has done other clemency, responded to other clemency petitions in the past. But my guess is there's they take a lot of detail and a lot of research, and all I can say is that I hope he acts on them without knowing what the clemency petitions actually are, like who they're for and what all the facts are. I certainly can't opine on, on their substance or whether or not they should be granted, but it certainly is a process. That's for sure.
Okay, we have a question here from Livy. I'm going to allow Livy to talk and give us your question.
Awesome, thank you. So I know you guys released that amazing report about the Aurora ICE detention facility recently, and I was just wondering if you could give us an overview of what work you've continued to do with that facility.
Sure, and thank you very much for the question and your interest in that. And we were very proud of putting that report out. And part of the main aspect of that report was to create more transparency and accountability on behalf of that facility. And a lot of that was legislative dependent, so passing laws. One was intended to bring an audit and or an inspection to the facility on a more regular basis. And another was to set up a legal defense fund so that we could help individuals to have a good, solid legal defense. Given that the legislature is now adjourned, the movement on those bills remains really, really unclear. We are exploring whether or not the governor could, by executive order, direct the Colorado Department of Health to do the inspection that was going to be part of the legislative package. And so that is definitely still out there. The other piece of the legal defense fund definitely does require legislative action, mainly because it needs an appropriation of funds. And the other problem is we're going to have a really, really hard time passing anything on the legislative front that requires money, just because of the pandemic has created a huge fiscal burden for the state, and it's unclear how much money there will be to do certain things. There are 2 other things real quickly in the works, not necessarily detention facility related, but immigration related. One is Senator Gonzalez was successful in passing a bill that prohibits or prevents courthouse arrests for civil violations. And so we hope to see some relief as far as individuals being picked up at courthouses, which did seem to be kind of a favorite hangout for ICE agents, if you will. That bill was signed into law about 10 days ago. Senator Gonzalez was also championing some legislation to prevent the sharing of information from state agencies with the federal government, except as otherwise required by federal law. And although that bill has not yet been introduced, we're also pushing that, or I should say Senator Gonzalez is taking the lead to push that there be an executive order along those lines, at least for this interim basis.
All right. I don't see any other questions, but if there are any, now is the time to ask. Does anybody on the panel have anything they want to add?
I just want to thank folks for being interested and being present this evening. It's great, and it's you know, it gives us that little extra boost of encouragement and support to continue our work. So thank you.
Great. And I'm going to try to do something fancy here. We do have a web page for this setup, and I think I might be able to share it with you all. So this is our web page. Can you all see that? Panelists, can you see it?
Oh my goodness, good job, Delana. That's pretty impressive.
You. I know. Some days I amaze myself, but it is doing my part. So the address is aclu.co.org// I never know the difference, doing my part CO. And you will be updated on what we're doing. And if there are future call to actions, we will have them here at this location so you can see them and take care, be a part of them. And now I'm going to try and stop sharing this. There we go. And we had one more question before we
that little sneaky one got one in.
Well, no, it's just thanking us and telling us how much they appreciate our work. So thank you so much. Anybody else on the panel want to say anything before we let people get back to their evening of quarantine?
We appreciate you all and your support, and it's, kind of all of us are, I think, toiling right now in a little bit of solitude, and I'm sure that's true for the listeners as well, and it's just good to feel you out there. We'll keep working.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. We'll be doing this again on Thursday night at 6 p.m. with our friends at Planned Parenthood. So if you're interested, you can go to our People Power website, peoplepower.org, sign up there, and we'll have more information about repro rights in this time of COVID-19. So I hope you can join us for that one. And everybody have a wonderful evening.
Thank you for leading us, Delana.
All right. Good night, everybody.